Okay, to start off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Christopher Carlson. I'm the fire chief, Point Roberts, Whatcom County Fire District number 5. And I would like to welcome everybody this evening to the wildfire informational meeting that we have. Right now, we're doing some assessments around the community. We finished those off today. We did them yesterday. And Jenny and Kirk, you guys can bring in information on those and what you found and just the general quality of homes in Point Roberts during those surveys. But we're going to start off with the district, and I'll speak to our capabilities and what we have in place to attack a wildland fire if need be within our boundaries in Point Roberts, and the international agreements we have in place as well. So if nobody has any upfront questions real quick, I'll go ahead and get started, and I'll start with the fire district. Okay, so I'd like to have Kirk and have Jenny, Rebecca, Lynn, Mark, you guys go ahead, and Sarah, I guess, you guys can go ahead, you're on. I don't see anybody else that's on. I don't know who's the iPhone, but I don't see anybody else that is on prep and or part of DNR or the conservation district. So Jenny, would you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Coe. I work for the Whatcom Conservation District, which I will explain what that is if you don't know a little bit about that in my presentation later. But I coordinate a wildfire education program, and it is offered throughout Whatcom County. I also actually serve Skagit County as well. And I work with individual homeowners, and I work with communities, and I work at the county scale on wildfire planning and preparedness. And I will be giving a presentation a little bit later on some of the specifics of how to reduce wildfire risk on your property. So it's nice to meet you all, or see the names anyway.
Okay, Kirk.
Yeah, hello, I'm Kirk Troberg. I'm the Culshan Unit Fire Manager for the Northwest region of the Washington Department of Natural Resources. It's quite a mouthful. I'll give you some spatial reference to that during my part. But yeah, it was great to be out in the community and to really get a sense of it. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this.
Thank you very much. I'll go Lynn.
You have to click it up in the right, I guess. I'm Lynn Taylor. I'm the current president of PREP, the Point Roberts Emergency Preparedness Group. And we were asked to help out with this whole process of doing the assessments and getting this set up, and appreciate everything that the chief has done to put this together. And also Rebecca Goodwin and Mark Robbins were kind of instrumental when you first started this off, Jenny. I wasn't able to attend the first presentation, so they've kind of really taken things and done a great job with assisting putting this all together. So I want to thank them for doing that. And then I'll explain a little bit later what PREP does in the local area. That's me.
Thank you, Lynn. Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. Lynn has given a good introduction about PREP. Just that we've had the good fortune to get involved with this, and I've really enjoyed the past 2 days working with Jenny and with Kirk and with a couple of other of their colleagues, going out participating in some of the assessments and observing. And there's so much to learn, and this is a great opportunity. So thank you to everybody who's pulled together to make this happen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Mark Robbins.
Hi, everybody. Mark Robbins. So I've been pretty active in PREP for quite a few years. And so when I heard about this program, I encouraged the board to get involved along with the chief in sponsoring it from the community side. And I'm glad we did. And I want to thank Kirk for allowing me to tag along yesterday on the assessments. I thought it was interesting and educational. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Sarah?
Thanks for asking me to speak, Chief. I actually was not involved in a lot of this. The kudos go out to Lynn and to Rebecca and to Mark and to you. So thank you for getting our community involved in this. It's really a great opportunity to make a difference. Thank you.
So thank you. Anybody else on that I don't recognize that was involved in setting this up that hasn't spoken? Again, I'm not sure who the iPhone is, but okay, we'll get going. I know a lot of you. We know each other here in the community because it's a small community. It's a community that we very much hold to be our own. We've gone through a lot these last 2 years, as a lot of communities have, but geographically and demographically, it's really hit our community especially hard. So now we're starting to see the borders open up. And that's bringing people in, both traveling and coming down for commodities from Canada. And it's going to increase the amount of burns that are going on around the community for recreational purposes and residential and land clearing permits. Those that haven't been able to come down and work on their cabins are going to have a lot of trees and leaves and everything else that they're going to try to get rid of. And most of that's going to be burning process. So as it gets drier, as we get into later spring, summer, and it gets drier, obviously the wildfire risk increases with those changes in time. A little bit about our district. We have right around 43 volunteers. Around 28 of those are Canadian nationals who are allowed to cross the border, come here and volunteer for this agency. They're young men and women who have already gone through their fire credentialing. So they come down full certified as firefighters, and most have medical training. The rest are made up by county volunteers or county members coming up from the Ferndale, Bellingham area. Those are firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, advanced EMTs. And then lastly, but not least, the volunteers that come in from our community. We only have 6 volunteers that respond out of our community for this agency that are, one of them is a firefighter as well. Everybody else is either fireground support or engineers at that point, which an engineer drives the vehicles, they pump the apparatus for fire suppression and so forth. Since the 80s, this agency has really had a demographical problem with getting volunteers into the organization. So we just don't have the age groups that are interested in going through 4 to 5 months of firefighter training, 4 to 5 months of advanced medical training to become a state of Washington EMT or an advanced EMT. So we bring in most of our volunteers from the outside. And it's a great cost savings as well for the community by doing that, because they're already fully trained coming in from Canada. We support their education, and then most likely they go on to career organizations in the Lower Mainland. So what does that do for wildfire ability and response? Every community has a risk. We saw that in Colorado just this last summer with an urban interface fire that took out a bunch of communities just outside the Boulder area and Denver area, just north of. And you would consider that almost not possible because there's really no forest in those areas. But there is a lot of dry grass, a lot of open fields, and if something catches a spark and starts, the winds in Colorado can push it very, very quickly. Most homes are not fireproof. They have some fire resistive natures to them, but your roofs will burn, the siding will catch fire, it'll burn, and anything else you have next to your homes will burn. So I had friends in Colorado, firefighters that lost their homes during this last summer, and it was very devastating to that entire area. So could that happen here? At the turn of the 1900s, it's in our history that we had a large fire here. Now, I took a lot of the points. There are old pictures of that in our archives, I would say, that show the damage that was caused. Back then, we didn't have a lot of the homes, obviously. It was less populated back then. And today, it would be a completely different story with the damage that such of a fire would cause today. Now, everywhere in Point Roberts is a risk. We have different fuels in some of our areas. Higher risk or higher burning fuels. In the northern parts, we had a study done with the city of Delta or municipality, the Delta Fire departments there. And I'm getting those records. Hopefully we'll have those records to share. But it showed the volatility of the different types of fuels, meaning plants, grasses, trees, those types of things in our community, because they're a partner in this as well. So we do have that international agreement with Delta Fire that if we get into something that we cannot handle, and what may we not be able to handle when it comes to a wildland or a wildfire situation here. If it gets into the crown fuels, meaning the tops of the trees, if it gets high and it's wind blowing, we will have difficulty with those types of fires, as pretty much any area does once it gets into those fuels. If it stays on the ground, we have a good first response with our vehicles. We have a mini pumper, many of you seen driving around the community. And then we also have re-outfitted our brush truck. It's the red pickup truck that you see parked. During the summer, we put a removable skid in that vehicle that has 250 gallons of water foam on it, and it allows us to go off-road, including our mini pumper, which is four-wheel drive as well. So we've increased our capability over the last couple of years with our approach to wildland fire. A number of years ago, we had a log burning in the middle of the forest. It was on a walking trail, and the owner of South Beach Restaurant at the time actually came across it with their family and reported it to us. And it was a good quarter mile to a half a mile in to where our hose line will not reach. So we have to go in with tools and backpacks that carry water to deal with those types of things. And luckily, we were able to get to it before it started any of the ground fuels on fire around it, and we're able to suppress it. So there is a risk. Now, I get a lot of phone calls about properties, people allowing their yards to overgrow. I cannot tell people or control what people do with their yards. That's a county issue, but I still get the phone calls saying, you need to call my neighbor. They need to mow their yard. They need to cut down this tree. They need to cut down that tree because it's a hazard. Those are out of my control. That would be strictly county and county code when it comes to being able to enforce someone to clean up their property. When it comes to, I understand that's the fire risk, but even the fire marshal doesn't have the authority to come in and tell people that they need to clean up their properties. Again, that would be a county issue. I will help as much as I possibly can, obviously, but you can't believe how many phone calls I get when it comes to those types of concerns. And I understand the concern. Hopefully you have a good relationship with your neighbors, and you can talk through those types of things and wanting to keep your community area clean and safe, and less likely to have a problem if we do have a wildfire incident here. So I'll take questions at the end, but I just want to let you know a little bit about your organization and what our capabilities are. We have the international agreement with the municipality of Delta Fire Rescue. We also have relationships with DNR, with Kirk, and their personnel as well. And then we also have relationships through the Delta Fire Department to have access to aircraft, helicopters coming in from Boundary Bay during the summer, where some of them are positioned during the wildfire season. So I'm gonna pass it over to Lynn to speak about PrEP, and I'll take questions at the end of this meeting. So thank you for your time.
So I'm not real sure how long it was started. Maybe Mark, you know a little bit about the history of PrEP. Do you know when it was started?
Not off the top of my head, but I've been here 16 years, so I'm gonna guess that there was a group that was working on emergency preparedness probably about the time that I got here, and it kind of fizzled a little bit, and then Ed in Virginia, Lester got involved, and others, and kind of changed the focus a little bit. So it's been going on probably 15 years.
Okay. So I actually heard about PrEP the first time when my wife got here. We bought our home 3 years ago, and she came up 3 months ahead of me. And in December of 2018, there was a major windstorm on the point, and the point literally was without power for about a week in some areas But it was pretty shocking to have that much wind and that much damage. There were a lot of trees that were down. There were a lot of problems with communications. And I know that she heard from a friend that she could get help if she went to the community center. And so she went down to the community center and got fed and got taken care of. And that was one of the things that PrEP does, is to open up the community center and start getting meals to feed the population in the event of an emergency. So I was very appreciative of the fact that she got taken care of as well as she did, and that the outreach and the heartfelt outpouring of help and assistance that was provided by the community and as a whole was actually very amazing. And it was nice to know that we were moving into such a wonderful area where people took care of each other. So I got an opportunity to get involved in PrEP a couple of months ago, and so I'm still kind of a newbie in the process, but I'm learning more about what we do and how we're doing it. But the primary function of PrEP is to actually assist the fire department in whatever emergency needs it has in the time of an emergency, to open up the community center. We currently store food and supplies for an emergency at about 5 locations around the point. And that's the community center, the fire department, the local Trinity Church. So, and we maintain those food sources. A lot of that is Henry. If you know Henry Rosenthal around the area, and he does a tremendous job of getting food stocks and things taken care of. Another thing that we're going to be involved in is assisting the DART group, which is the aviators group that does emergency functions on whenever there's an emergency in an area. And they're in the process of preparing in the event that there's a major emergency. We've had a couple of practices with them in the past, and we're going to be doing another one again here June 18th coming up, where we will actually have pilots that'll be flying in food that's to kind of mimic an emergency, but they're actually bringing in supplies that they're going to drop off for Point Roberts and for about 10 other locations around the state. That's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 7,000 pounds of food and supplies. So you can imagine that that's actually a lot of donations that are coming in when we don't even have an emergency, but so that we can be prepared for an emergency when one comes. So it's a super organization. We've got a lot of things that we're in the process of assisting with, and the wildfire assessments that Jenny brought along has just been just one of those things that people have been asking about, especially with the Canadians being gone for quite some time, and the number of properties around the point that have vegetation, excuse me, vegetation and potential for fire hazard. Those kinds of issues have been coming along, and it's nice to have somebody that's going to step up and assist us with doing assessments around the point. I was really surprised. I went out and did part of the assessments yesterday, and I was really pleasantly pleased with the reception that we all got from the people that had invited us to their houses to come and do those assessments. And I think that we probably have another 1,000 homes or so that need assessments that could probably use the help. So we're gonna start helping to work on that issue. I think that's other than one other thing I did mention. Rebecca was one of the people that helped to get this started. Rebecca also opened up her home to the volunteers that came over. And I just thought that was absolutely amazing that she did that, and she really deserves kudos for doing that. Thanks for all of your assistance, and if any of the people that are listening want to get involved with PrEP and become part of that, you can reach us at prepgroup17@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and help you to get involved. That's all that I have, Chief.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that time. So I'm going to go to Kirk. I'll go to you with DNR.
All right, thank you, Chief. Yeah, I'll just reintroduce myself quick. I'm Kirk Troberg from Department of Natural Resources, and I manage the Culshan unit, which includes all of Whatcom and Skagit County. And yeah, I just want to echo what everyone said. Thank you to the community for having us up, especially those of you who invited us onto your property, and particularly Rebecca, who hosted us. Yeah, we very much appreciate it, and it was really nice to see the community up close, see, what it actually looks like, and to get a sense of, what the community is and of the challenges you have. And I crossed the border 8 times in the last 48 hours, so I can empathize with some of the challenge. I'm sure that's nothing for many of you. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit quick about what the Department of Natural Resources is and what our role is. So briefly, we're exactly at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, and I'm actually going to screen share here for a brief minute. Oh, the host has disabled it. Is it possible for me to share my screen? If not, that's okay. I can tell you everything you need to know.
Yep, nope, I can share. So give me 1 second. I was waiting for that. I didn't know you were going to have to share, but I will make you the host. And then if you can pass it back to me, and I'll open it up for Jenny when time being. So yeah, give me 1 second. Okay, you should be host now. So you should be able to screen share.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, did that pop up for everyone?
Mhm.
Okay, so the state, for the purposes of the Department of Natural Resources, the state is divided into 6 regions. We are in Northwest region here, which is the 5 Northwest counties. So Snohomish, Skagit, Whatcom, Island, and San Juan, with a little sliver of King County down here. And this is what that looks like up close. So the Northwest region, and don't worry too much about the details. I'm just trying to give you some spatial awareness here. Northwest region is split into 2 fire units. So I manage the Culshan unit, which is all of Whatcom County and a little bit of Skagit County. And Point Roberts is right up here. So obviously you're included in Whatcom County. Now, as far as jurisdiction goes, the DNR by RCW has jurisdiction over all forest land in the state, which is defined as unimproved, and here I can stop my share and bring it back. Forest land is defined as unimproved land with natural vegetation capable of carrying fire. So that's pretty gray. That can be interpreted a lot of different ways. But some examples in Point Roberts. So a nice short manicured lawn doesn't qualify. Some overgrown hedges don't qualify as DNR jurisdiction. However, there's a lot of forest land in Point Roberts or on Point Roberts, and many of you have forested chunks of your parcel. So maybe where your house is and your yard around it maybe wouldn't be fall into that forest land category, but maybe behind your house, the back acre or 2 does. So with that in mind, and the idea that the DNR has jurisdiction over that, for the Culshan unit, as far as capabilities, we have 5 fire engines, a 6-person crew module, and shared use of a helicopter to manage all of Whatcom and Skagit County and to support Eastern Washington in their wildfires. So we are often very busy, and as a result, and Chief could absolutely attest to this, we have had a really limited, if not non-existent presence in Point Roberts in the past. And that's something that when I came into this job a year and a half ago, we kind of started to recognize, and something we really want to rectify. You pay for our services with your taxes, and you're entitled to us serving you. So we really want to continue to build a relationship in Point Roberts with the community and with the fire department, so we can be there for you. And then I'll just close by quickly addressing the risk thing. And I just want to echo what Chief said about risk, and that everywhere has it. Even a place that is very low risk 363 days a year can have 2 days where really high risk conditions exist. And a lot of damage can be done in those 2 days. So people get lulled into thinking that, well, this is a rainy area. There's no risk in Western Washington. And there are parts of the year where that's true. That was true today. But the reality is it's not true year round. And you can have moments or days or stretches of very high risk conditions being present. And if you get an alignment of factors and an ignition in that time frame, a lot of damage can be done. And because of that, all the other things I've said and everything Chief and everyone else has said, that's why this FireWise stuff is so important. This is the things that you can do to put yourself and your property to set you up for the best chance of success if something occurs. So I believe that is all I have. Let me pass it back to you here, Chief. Okay, you should have hosting, Chief.
Yep, I got it again. So at this point, I would like to, I'm trying to help somebody on the phone here as well get on the meeting. So I apologize for going in and out during the meeting. But I'd like to follow up with either Rebecca or Mark, if you have any comments before we get to Jenny.
Nothing from me. This is great. I'm looking forward to hearing from Jenny. I had the pleasure of spending today with her, so I've seen her in action. So I know she's got a lot to share.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Nothing for me. No, not really. Nothing for me.
Okay. Okay, Jenny, I'm going to make you host so you can go with your portion of the meeting. Just give me 1 second.
Sounds good.
Okay, you should have control.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Share. Okay, can everybody see that? My screen? Okay, great. It looks like there's some folks that have been joining this session over the last few minutes. So for those of you that missed the introductions and didn't meet me on your property today, my name is Jenny Coe, and I coordinate the Wildfire Resilience Program at the Whatcom Conservation District. And I'm going to talk about briefly what the Whatcom Conservation District is in a minute. But I also want to echo what everybody has said so far about the great connections we've made in spending some time in Point Roberts the last 2 days with the prep group and with the fire department. And it was just a really great opportunity to meet the folks that are there responding to emergencies and that can help share some of this information.
I'll grab a mask. I'm on a Zoom call.
And so thank you to everyone who helped out with that, and especially Rebecca, who so kindly hosted us while we stayed there. So with that, I want to get started on my presentation here, and I'm going to be talking about some more of the specifics of how to reduce wildfire risk to your property. And before I get into that, I just want to note that like every property has its own unique setting and situation. So these are some general concepts that can be applied to most places. But the ideal situation is to have a site visit or a risk assessment with somebody who knows how to talk about that stuff and really get some good specifics about your property. It's definitely not rocket science, but there is some science behind it. So here we go. My slides always have a delay when I first get started, so bear with me here while it decides to start working. Come on. Hopefully it's going to start working. There we go. Okay. So really briefly, if you haven't heard of a conservation district or Whatcom Conservation District, We are basically a special purpose district. There's, I think, 45 across Washington state. And we are county based. We are not the county, but we work within the county boundaries. And we're really focused on working with landowners and enabling them to foster a healthy and sustainable relationship with the environment. And so that looks like a number of different things in a number of different programs at every district around the state, depending on what the natural resource issues are. And so just for a quick example, we have farm planners that work in our office that work with farmers to help them, reduce runoff and manage manure. And we have folks that work on water quality and with improving salmon habitat. And it's really wide range of programs that we work on. And my particular program is really focused on helping landowners better understand the environment in which they live. And part of that is understanding wildfire risk. So speaking of wildfire risk, I thought this might be a helpful place to start out the conversation. And there's been a number of studies and research happening in Western Washington about wildfire risk in Western Washington, because it's very different than the other side of the mountains in Central and Eastern Washington, where we see fires on a regular basis. So there's been a lot of studies about whether the wildfire risk in Western Washington is increasing. And the conclusion is yes, and it's due to a number of different climate factors. In essentially our conditions are changing, and it's due to increasing air temperatures, less rain in the summer, earlier snow melt, and those things all kind of accumulate leading up to drier fuels or vegetation and drier forests. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we have. Sorry. Okay. I think I'm not on mute.
Maybe ask people to mute themselves.
If you're not on mute, can you please mute yourself?
Yeah, iPhone MDR, please mute yourself.
Yes. Thank you. So because of these factors, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have more fire, but the conditions are more ripe for fire. So the possibility is higher, but you still need sort of all the right things to line up to have, a wildfire. But we do know that these conditions are increasing our risk. So I wanted to kind of start with that baseline. And I think a couple people have now tossed out the word wildland urban interface, or for short, we call it WUI. So I'm going to call it that. But I just wanted to define that really quickly, because it's essentially where human development is in or near natural or wildland vegetation. And this can look like a number of different things. So for example, I have more of a suburban sort of urban type setting on the right side of my screen, where you have more of a suburban neighborhood next to like a large park, or you have something like it might be a little bit more rural, where it's up on a hill, it's forest all around, steep slopes, and there's homes placed all within that more forested area. So it can look like a suburban urban area. It can also look like a more rural forested area, but it's still wildland urban interface. And those are the places where it's the likelihood of fire causing a disaster or damage is more likely. So it increases, because a fire in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But when it is affecting humans and their structures, that's when it becomes a disaster. So we're kind of focused on those areas where humans are interacting with that natural vegetation. So this is information I totally stole from Kirk. So in talking to Kirk and other folks that work for our region DNR and their experiences recently, they are reporting that some of the largest fires that they are responding to in the Northwest region are happening in late winter, early springtime, which is not necessarily what I would have thought. I would have thought it would have been more summertime. The reason is because it's a time where people are tending to burn things in their backyard. But it's also a time where, after really dry winds and potentially a dry winter or dry conditions are occurring, and even though it's cold, things get really dried out, and it's before we've really had that green up in the spring, late spring, where the fuels have a lot of moisture in them to stave off ignition. And so I think things tend to ignite easier and they spread faster. So that's an interesting little tidbit to keep in mind. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 different types of ignition sources when it comes to fire. There's a surface fire, where it's essentially fire moving across the surface, burning whatever fuels are in its way, in its path. And if there's no break in those fuels or vegetation, and there are structures, it can reach the structure and, do damage to a structure. So there's surface fire. Then there's crown fire, which is essentially fire moving across the canopy of a forest or trees, which, in talking to those that are fighting fires in our area, this isn't a common scenario at all here, and I don't think it happens hardly at all. So it's more common in places like California or Montana, where they have more extreme conditions and the right fuel types for something like that to happen. Now, that's not to say that it could never happen. I don't want to say that because we know our conditions are changing, but not as likely. And probably the most important one to really focus on are the embers, believe it or not. Embers are sort of burning pieces of material that can get picked up by the wind when there's a fire, and they can blow a mile ahead of a fire. So whether it's blowing from your neighbor's yard in their burn pile, or there's a wildfire and there's a massive wind behind it picking up embers and starting spot fires in other places, embers are actually the #1 reason why homes burn down, because they blow in through vents and they get lodged in small cracks and crevices on decks and under decks and in wood piles, and start fires that way. So a lot of the science behind the things that are recommended to be done on your property are actually focused on how you can protect your structure from those embers getting into your structure and causing damage. Okay, so one other piece of information that I think is important to know is that there's also been a lot of research on how homes are burning down. And we see, on the news, if there's a big wildfire in California and they're, showing the helicopter view of the neighborhood aftermath. And you see, like 1 or 2 or 3 homes that survived, and it seems so random. And then the rest is just, black landscape. But there's reasons why certain homes survive and other ones don't a lot of times. And so there's been a lot of research done about, okay, why are these homes surviving and these ones not? And so through that research, without going into all the sciencey details, the research has showed that homes are igniting due to the condition of the home itself and everything around it out to 100 feet from the foundation. And so they gave this zone a term, and they're calling it the home ignition zone. And so moving forward, and when we do our wildfire risk assessments with landowners, this is the zone we're really focused on, because we're wanting to protect the structures, because that's where people's, the value is, that's where the important things are. And so this is the zone that's really where you want to focus if you want to reduce wildfire risk to your property and protect your structures and make them more survivable. So it really is the little things sometimes, as I mentioned before, when talking about embers. Some of the things that I recommend when I'm doing these risk assessments seem like such small details that don't seem very significant, but they really are when it comes to embers and the ability for embers to damage or burn down your home. So I'm talking about like making small modifications to the construction and the vegetation around your homes can make a big difference. Okay. So in looking at the structure itself, I'm going to get into some details here. The first place we start looking at is the roof. And that's just because the sheer surface area and exposure of a roof leaves it the most vulnerable. It's protecting your home. So having a Class A fire rated roof is going to provide the best protection. An example of that is a composition shingle roof or a metal roof. also stucco, and there's other materials that can qualify, but they're not typically roofs that we see in or are using roofing materials that we're using in our areas. So just know that if you have a composition shingle roof or a metal roof that's in good condition, it's going to go a long way in helping protect your house. But the other key thing about roofs is that maintenance is really important. So you want to make sure you're cleaning off the tree debris and any of those fine, dry materials that are easy to burn. You want to get those off your roof, and you want to get them out of your gutters. Because if you can imagine embers landing in this gutter that is on my slide here, that stuff will burn really easily. And most likely there's a wood trim right there, so it could ignite the wood, get underneath your roof. There's all kinds of ways that debris on there can ignite and cause problems. And so maintenance is really important when it comes to roofs. Obviously, an untreated wood shake roof is extremely flammable, and most people know that. So one of the things I did see a lot today was moss growing on roofs. And while you might not think moss is flammable, when it dries out, it is very flammable. So that's another, important maintenance thing when you're taking care of your roof is to get that moss off as well. So when it comes to siding and windows, the siding material can make a big difference in protecting your home. Obviously, wood siding is going to be more flammable than like a fiber cement type siding. So the siding that's usually recommended for the best fire resistance to a home would be like the Hardy Plank is I think the brand name for the fiber cement composite siding. That offers a lot of protection for your home. Stucco is another one, but I never see stucco in Northwest Washington. But they're definitely more fire resistant than wood and vinyl. So as far as vinyl goes, because it's a plasticky material, it will melt under high heat. And what happens is when it melts, it leaves the sort of the inner structure of your siding and your home exposed. And it can also melt down to whatever vegetation might be up next to your home and ignite that. So siding is important. And this picture really quickly is in a research lab where they built a house, and they built one side with really fire resistant materials and kind of rock around the front. And then they built the other side with wood and added some pine needles around the front and blew, a bunch of massive embers at it, and waited to see what would happen, like which one's going to ignite. And obviously the side with the wood shakes and the pine needles and all things like that, the debris around it is the one that ignited, and the other one didn't. So it's just a visual example of how those materials are more protective. As far as windows go, dual pane windows withstand a lot more heat, especially tempered glass windows. They won't crack. And so if you have a single pane window that's under a lot of heat intensity, it can crack, leaving the inside of your home exposed. So vents are probably the most common issue I see on homes, but also the cheapest and easiest fix to make. So if you don't do anything else, this is a pretty easy one to do on your home. So what happens with vents is that a lot of times they're either not screened, or they have screening on them that's with the holes that are too big that let embers in. And so some common vent examples that I see are these gable vents, that are kind of at the top of the eaves there, at the top of the gable there, and then the foundation or crawl space vents closer to the ground. And so the ideal screening size for those vents is 1/8 of an inch metal mesh. And the standard vent screening I see is 1/4 inch. So you don't necessarily have to go in and try and remove the existing screen, but if you can get some 1/8 inch metal mesh and put it over the existing screen, that is a good fix. Or screening things that don't have a screen. The only vent I would say probably you shouldn't screen would be the dryer vent, just because I feel like putting screening on there, if it's not already there, would just add to lint getting stuck in there, and lint is very flammable. So I think you can leave that one unscreened. The other thing with the foundation and crawl space vents is because they're closer to the ground, they tend to collect a lot of leaves and maybe mulch. And so getting that sort of inset area cleaned out is also helpful. Okay. When it comes to decks or porches, if we have this saying, and also fences as well, we have a saying of if it's attached to the house, it's part of the house and it can carry fire to the house. So decks are one of those real vulnerable attachments to homes that can often be the demise of a home if they catch on fire. And it's typical if you have a raised deck for people to store stuff under them. I saw that a lot today. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with storing certain things under there, but you certainly don't want to store things like large piles of lumber or wood, and especially not firewood underneath your deck. So that really should be a non-flammable zone. Sometimes people screen them in, sometimes people put metal skirting around the base. It just kind of depends, but you never want to store flammable materials under there. The other thing about decks is if you look at the middle picture on the top of the deck, a really common place for tree debris and pine cones and pine needles to collect is that space where the deck board meets the house. And ideally there's some metal flashing there, which helps protect it from ignition. But if there's not, and you get all that debris there, especially in the corners, that's the same place where embers are going to collect when it's windy. And so that debris allows, if embers land in it, it's a receptive fuel bed, it can igniting your wood deck and your wood siding. And so making sure that your decks are cleaned off of all that debris and getting in those cracks and crevices to clean it off is just a regular maintenance thing that should happen, spring and summer when it's appropriate. And then, I have a picture on the far right that kind of shows it's a nice wood deck. It's in good condition. And then the area underneath it, the homeowner has just put rock. It's not, if embers get blown in there, they can't burn the rock. So it's not providing anything that can ignite and cause flames underneath the deck. Okay, so from the home, kind of moving out beyond it, the home itself is really important, but also the first 5 feet, immediate 5 feet around a home is pretty susceptible because a lot of people have plants and vegetation or mulch right up next to their houses. And most of that is going to be flammable depending on the condition that it's in, right? So ideally, you have a 3 to 5 foot perimeter around your home that's non-flammable, whether it's bare dirt or whether it's pea gravel or rock stepping stones or whatever. It's really good to have that sort of protective non-flammable zone so that you don't have flammable materials like wood pallets or firewood or plants right up against your house. Outside of that 5 foot zone, you can have your plants, you can have your mulch, things like that. But ideally you have that sort of protective perimeter around your structure. If you live in the woods, like a lot of you do in Point Roberts, it's hard there's always a lot of tree debris, on the ground and dropping on your roof. And in this picture on the right, I've shown a relatively extreme situation where there's a ton of tree debris on the roof here. It's also a wood shake roof and right up against the siding. So if you can, raking that stuff back away from the house, even if it's just 5 feet away and spreading it out so it can sort of break down into the soil is a good way to keep fire and flame from being right up next to your house. So I want to talk about mulch really quickly because I recognize that it's great for so many things, keeping moisture in the soil, helping your plants grow, preventing erosion, lots of things mulch is great for, but it is also combustible. And so, as I mentioned in the last slide, you can use mulch, but you want to put it outside of that 5 foot zone. And so besides putting it outside the 5 foot zone, there are some mulches that tend to be a little bit more flammable than others, like shredded Western red cedar. Our Western red cedars are native, they're beautiful, but they are also probably our most flammable tree that we have naturally growing here. So try and avoid using that type of mulch, and then maybe think about potentially rock mulch. within that first 5 feet, and organic mulch outside of that. Oh, and this picture in the corner is, I think I stole it off the internet. It's not anything local, but it was a house that was damaged from a fire that started in the mulch that was right up next to the house. So it does happen. Okay, so I think most of you in Point Roberts are probably using propane. And I know that propane tanks aren't necessarily usually the prettiest thing. So people like to hide them with vegetation and plants, or, some sort of wooden encasement. But the thing with propane tanks is that if they're working properly, they're designed to off gas. So if they're under a lot of pressure is building up inside from heat, there's a valve that will open and let the fuel out, the fumes out. And so if this is happening and there's vegetation around it that's on fire, you're going to have a really volatile situation. And so ideally a propane tank is a good 30 feet from the house, which I know is not often the case. And it's cleared around. So no vegetation immediately around your propane tank. Gravel or bare dirt is a better situation near that propane tank for fire safety. This slide is an example of what some people have done to disguise their propane tank and make it fun looking. I'm not suggesting you should necessarily go and do this. Some of you probably lease them and may not be allowed, but I just thought it was an entertaining example of some artwork that people have done on their propane tanks. Especially the tomato soup, Campbell's tomato soup one is pretty funny. Okay. So moving into more of the landscaping realm of wildfire preparedness on your property, I do want to say, because I know that this misinformation is out there about what kind of landscaping you have to be fire resistant, and we just don't live in a landscape where it's going to look like the moon. Maybe if you live in the desert, this would be somewhat normal, but in the Pacific Northwest, we have trees and everything grows all the time. So you really don't have to have a landscape that looks like the surface of the moon to be fire resistant. You can have something that looks more like this other picture. And so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that. So there's some concepts to keep in mind when it comes to having a fire resistant landscape. And some people will have an opportunity to choose these things at the beginning if they bought a new property and they're doing new landscaping, or and some people may retrofit their landscape, whatever it is. There's some good concepts to keep in mind. And really the idea is that you're breaking up fuels on the surface of the ground. So if you have a fire moving across the surface of the ground, it's going to reach a point, whether it's short grass or a rock wall or a water feature or something, where the flames are going to die down, and it's not going to keep burning. So planting in clusters is one way to do that. That's like, you put your plants in kind of a group and then you put a border around it. And in between your planting areas, you have sort of the fuel break, which would be short grass or, stepping stones or something, or rock path, something like that, to just break up that continuity. As I said, rock features are another, option for that. And then, lawn, as I said, can be actually a great fuel break, especially if it's short. If it's tall dry grass is not a good thing. That's extremely flammable. But if you have well-maintained grass that's kept short to about 4 inches height, that can really act as a great fill break in your landscape. The other thing to keep in mind is we are not really trying to exclude fire from the landscape, but we are trying to keep it manageable. And one of the ways to do that is to keep it on the ground. And so there is this term that we use a lot when we're doing these assessments, and it's called a ladder fuel. And that's a situation where you have basically continuous vegetation from the ground up into larger trees. So an example of that would be, a particularly flammable example of that would be tall, dry grass into blackberries, up to a cedar tree with low hanging branches. So you get that continuous ladder that fire can climb into the tree where it becomes much more difficult to fight and much more intense. So we want to also keep fire on the ground. And one of the best ways to do that is to prune up some lower branches on some of your bigger trees. And, we are rarely recommending actually cutting trees down. Trees provide a lot of great shade and other benefits. So in most cases, we're not recommending cutting them down. We're more recommending pruning up those lower limbs to create that space between the tree and the vegetation below it. Sometimes it makes more sense to remove the underbrush. It just kind of depends on the specific situation. And there are some guidance and specifics on how high up to prune a tree. And it kind of depends on what's growing underneath it, how tall it is, all these other things, the age of it. And there's definitely some guidance available on how to properly prune a tree that we were providing homeowners today when we were out doing those assessments. But the idea there is really to just create that vertical break so that fire can't climb. The other thing to think about is our native plants are, just because they're native to our area, they're typically pretty fire resistant. And there's a lot of choices in, if you are making landscape decisions and you want to add plants or replace something that's really flammable with something more fire resistant, there's a lot of great native landscape choices that do other things besides be fire resistant, like attract butterflies and bees and things like that, that aren't going to add additional risk to your landscape. So just for a scale, as far as how fire resistant plants are, fire resistant plants tend to have more moisture content in their leaves. They have less buildup of dead vegetation in the center or around the base of them. They're usually more drought resistant, and they typically have a lower compact growth form. So just for reference, this table kind of shows you the more fire resistant type plants down to the less fire resistant type plants. And you'll see at the top are succulents, and then towards the bottom are grasses. They'd have to be dry grasses, and conifers, which are like our Douglas firs and our western red cedars and hemlocks. So as far as flammable plants go, I just thought it would be helpful to show some examples of ones that are really common in our area that we see that are particularly flammable. They are usually water stressed. They accumulate a lot of dry dead material, and they tend to have a higher oil or resin content in them, and sometimes be very scented. Juniper is one very common landscaping plant that is extremely flammable. So you definitely don't want to have any juniper right up against your house. Arborvitae is another one, and that is so common in, especially around borders of properties, because it's a great screen between you and your neighbors. They grow really fast, they make this great hedge, but they are extremely flammable. So if you have those, just try and make sure they're maintained in the base and the areas around the bottom. Don't have a lot of brush around it that could, help carry fire into the arborvitae. Scotchbroom is another one. It's also invasive. It's a pain in the butt to get rid of, and it's a very flammable. But if you see this on your property, try and get ahead of it if you can. And then blackberries. Blackberries have all those dry canes that are really flammable. And even though they may look green in a lot of places, if you dig into the center, there's always a lot of dry canes in there, so they can spread fire pretty well too. So beyond sort of the landscaped area and looking more into, like, if you have a forested area on your property, the things to consider that really are probably the most risk are bigger, larger piles, accumulations of plant material, or slash, we call it, or blow down from windstorms. And there's a picture on the left here of an example of that. It's kind of like, if you were to build a campfire, you start with that kindling, right? And you're crisscrossing the logs and the limbs, and you're creating that airspace so you can get a good fire going. Well, it's basically like a campfire, ready to go in the right conditions. And so you don't want to have that within that 100-foot zone of your house. Those piles can also serve as like habitat for creatures, and that's fine, but you just want to make sure it's outside that 100-foot zone. And then of course, as I mentioned, managing and reducing those invasive species that tend to be more flammable. And then sometimes it's appropriate to do some thinning of some of the smaller, sicklier trees and manage for some of the bigger, healthier trees, because it is okay to have big, healthy trees on your property. But if you have a lot of dense, unhealthy trees in the understory, you probably want to start getting rid of those, or at least cutting them down so they're don't have branches on them and they're more like a snag for wildlife or something. And sometimes it's appropriate if you have these issues near a recreation trail, or leaning towards somebody's house or a road, it's appropriate to take those out beyond just for wildfire purposes, I guess. So other considerations, if you do have a forested area, it's actually great to keep a good canopy cover, because it does provide shade and it reduces the soil temperature, allowing the vegetation in there to retain more moisture, which means it's less likely to spread fire and ignite. Excuse me. The other things you can do is like incorporate some pathways through your forest, because if there is a wildfire, it allows the fire department or DNR, whoever's responding to that fire, to have better access to areas that are deeper into the woods. It also allows them to potentially lay hose if they can. So that's a nice sort of also break in the fuels if you can incorporate that, depending on what your property is like and if you have that ability. Okay, so I'm kind of done with those specifics. And now I just want to talk really briefly about some of the resources that are available to homeowners throughout Whatcom County. And as you heard us talk about before, we were out doing 2 days of these wildfire risk assessments, which are at no cost to you. As long as our programs have funding to provide this program, we can continue providing these free wildfire risk assessments to residents. And there's a few different ways to sign up for them. Typically, I would tell people on a Zoom like this that they can go to our Whatcom Conservation District website, wildfire pages, and there's a place to sign up through the website to get a risk assessment. But because we have some great coordination out here in Point Roberts, my recommendation, if you haven't had a chance to sign up for a risk assessment, you're not already on the waiting list, is to get yourself on the waiting list through the prep group. I actually put the prep group email in the chat. I don't know if anybody saw that. So you can email them and they'll get you on a list. If you don't see that, you can contact the fire department and they will connect with the appropriate people and get you on that list. I don't know when we're coming back out yet. We kind of need to see how things go and how many people are interested, but I have a feeling we'll be back out again, within a few months or so when we've got some time. So if you haven't had that opportunity, don't feel like you've lost out on that. The other thing we do is we work at sort of the neighborhood scale. And one of the things I did not see today when I was out working with these assessments is any sort of like organized neighborhood with a HOA. As somebody who isn't familiar with Point Roberts very much, I don't know how many of those exist. They don't necessarily have to exist, but there is this program called the Firewise program, which is it's basically this, it's a nationwide program, but Firewise is sort of the place where all of the science and the tools come through about being prepared for wildfire. So it's a neighborhood-based program where neighbors can work together to understand their wildfire risk and to make a plan to do something about that. So it kind of provides a framework for neighbors to do that. And then that's something that the conservation districts can help a community do and meet some requirements of doing projects and other things that the community decides are important. And then it's a recognition program. So the community gets recognized as a national Firewise community. And I have another slide that I'll show you. We do have a number of Firewise communities in Whatcom County. Anyway, so it's a great program. And if there's a sort of a neighborhood interest in that, we can talk about moving forward with that at some point. But it provides some good perks. Sometimes there's grant funding available and project assistance. So it's a good way to go. We also available to do presentations and outreach events. So if the community decides they want to do, for example, a safety day or something one weekend, and the fire department, and we can come and provide information, and maybe DNR brings Smokey Bear out, it's just showing up to things like that. Providing people with information is something that we do. And so those are some of the services that we offer through this program, which are all free. And back to that Firewise program concept, I kind of described it already, but I just wanted to show you this list of folks that are currently participating in the program. I don't know how familiar all of you are with the communities in Whatcom County, but one of the oldest Firewise communities is Lummi Island, Scenic Estates out there on Lummi Island. They've been involved in this program since 2003, and they're still going, which is great. And we just had some new ones come on board at the end of this last year, which are a community over by Lake Patton, and then Peaceful Valley, which is out by the Kendall area, just recently joined in. And I'm also working with 3 other communities out in the Glacier area to do this program. So there's a lot of momentum here. And the great thing about it is that, when we're talking about reducing your risk within that home ignition zone, sometimes when we're talking about 100 feet around our home, that's well on a neighbor's property or 2 neighbors down property. So it is really important to work together to address that shared risk. And this program kind of provides that framework to do that. And that is all I have. My contact information is on this slide. And I think at this point, we have about 8 minutes or so, or 10 minutes or so to go through any questions that people have. And I know those of us that spoke are happy to answer questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I truly appreciate all that information that you provided, those that are joining us this evening. So if anybody would like to have any specific questions for DNR, for the Conservation District, for myself, or for PrEP, the floor is open. So would anybody have any specific questions that you would like to ask? I think everybody got all the information they needed so far. So at this point, again, we'll publish this. Kirk, do you have anything to end with?
No, no, that was great. Just thank you again to everyone in the community who participated and invited us onto your property. And yeah, really glad we're able to do it, and excited to come back and do some more.
Really
Okay,
quick, I do see a question in the chat. I will read it out loud here before we go. It says, my 2-acre property is adjacent to 15 acres of forest with extensive undergrowth. The only protection action I can take is to cut down the 15 large trees on my property. Is there anything that can be done to require the owner of the forested property to clean out the undergrowth? If not, should I remove the trees on my property? That's a great question. There isn't a perfect answer to that question. I would say that depending on who the property owner is, if it's a park or if it's a private property owner, I would say the best thing to do is to reach out to that person and have a conversation and let them know, about this program, about what you've learned, share some information and talk about maybe some of the things that could be done. I would start there. Maybe you've already done that. I don't know. It's hard. It is hard when you have, a neighboring situation that is putting you at risk. But I think the more you can try and work together with that neighbor, provide them some information, have some conversations, the farther you will get. Sometimes that doesn't work. I realize that. But there isn't really any regulation associated with that type of thing. Other than, if there's a fire that starts on their property and damages other people's property and it's their fault, they may be responsible for paying for that. But does anybody have anything to add to that? Answer, non-answer?
I agree. It's difficult to deal with neighbors, and we can't pick usually who our neighbors are, but we can work on the relationships that we have with our neighbors and within our small little communities here in Point Roberts. So hopefully we can do that positively, and we can come to solutions that benefit both of us or all four sides of our structure with our neighbors that border us, and continue in the future safer and at less risk for wildland fires. Anybody else? Lynn, do you have anything to say?
Actually, I had when I was on the assessment yesterday, that one of the people asked if there was going to be any kind of leaf gathering and pickup around the Point Roberts area. And I had heard some mention that there might be some assistance with picking up or collection of rubbish or just leaves and that type of thing in general, because I know that a lot of people don't really know how to deal with that. And we do have some residents on the point that are not real excited about having to haul stuff to the garbage and pay extra for it. That type of thing might be a huge benefit. But I don't know if are any funds available for something like that. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. Am I muted? No. Okay. I don't think that anything's been finalized, but taxpayers going through PRAC have suggested that something like that, just as at least a one-time exercise to especially to help out the Canadian property owners who many of whom have perhaps neglected their property for the last 2 years, could use a helping hand with that. And PRAC contacted, I guess it comes under Department of Health now, about whether they could work with Candu to do a community-wide large item and green waste pickup free of charge. And they seem very receptive to it. We're almost surprisingly so. We're very pleased how receptive they seemed. They thought that was a great idea. I don't think it's been finalized. I suppose that would be most appropriate in the springtime when more people start coming down. It would be available to everybody, not just part-time property owners. But so I hope we're going to have a green waste pickup this year.
I hope that happens as well. One thing you need to know, there's regulatory red tape on moving debris from one property to another. That is actually illegal to do that, to associate and to help neighbors. Now, if it's a community-wide effort, when we had the big incident with all the trees that came down in Point Roberts a number of years ago, obviously we had a huge burn pile that was adjacent to the fire district here. And I had to get special permission from Northwest Clean Air through the DNR and the fire marshal's office in order to allow the debris from all these different properties to become to one area of the point. So I am supporting that, and I'll put my support behind a green waste pickup, especially for those property owners that have 2 years of waste that have compiled on their properties. And we'll see what we can come up with. So please keep me informed and then loop on that.
I was just going to add, because we've talked about the assessments that we've done over these past 2 days, but I'm not sure that we've mentioned that it was actually 50 assessments, and that was made possible by 4 individual experts being on hand. So the other thing I think that was interesting is the list built up quite quickly when word was put out. There were some names initially that had, kind of been collected, but a call went out and it filled up quite quickly. So I think it'll be interesting to see if I think now we're gaining some knowledge and information about how to do this again. But it was great to see that response. And Jenny, I wonder if you could just comment about what you actually provide in the way of a report to landowners, because I'm not sure that we've touched on that.
Yeah, I guess we didn't talk about that. So the assessments are, and ideally are when the homeowner is around, which I know wasn't possible in a lot of cases the last couple days. But it's a conversation that I have with a homeowner where we walk around, look at the structure itself, and look at that whole home ignition zone. And I point things out and explain things. And meanwhile, I'm taking notes in a form that I have, basically an inspection report. That sounds maybe official and scary, but it's not. It's just a good way to put information in. And it includes pictures, and then I put all of that together in an organized report form for you, where I've made my specific notes for your property, included pictures for reference, and then I send it via email to you. It doesn't really go anywhere beyond that except for sit on in my computer files, unless I have to do some grant reporting, which is typically doesn't include specific addresses or anything. It's just like, I did this many assessments in Point Roberts area. But so you do get a full report, and in that report there are a lot of other resources that are linked in there that you can check out about fire resistant plants and how to sign up for the Whatcom emergency alert notification system, and some other helpful information that we don't really cover in the assessment. Also, like what to do in an evacuation situation, what to have in a go bag, some of the more situational information that we don't cover in that portion of the assessment. So you'll get that to refer to, and you have it for whenever you decide, oh, I want to go back and look and see what she told me to do about this, and you have that for forever.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. We're going to be running short on time here with the Zoom meeting, but we have a few more minutes. One thing that I'd like to say is that some people may have taken some of this information or what they're going to receive in the reports, maybe overwhelming, something that they really can't do. They don't have the finances to complete, or they just don't have the physical help necessary. You can always reach out to the fire department. We have a lot of volunteers, a lot of young men and women who can get out, and that would be part of our job description for injury purposes to my volunteers, getting out and helping clear for wildfire purposes. I can't say that we would be able to do it all the time or at a last minute, just because of our administrative duties and training and everything else that the fire department and the volunteers have to complete. But I would be willing to, at times that we're able, to assist and to try to start that process and help whoever we can within our community. So please don't be overwhelmed with the information that was provided, and reach out if you have some ideas, or if you would like to just start little things that could really take a big step in helping improve your property safety for wildland fire. Anybody else before we end the meeting?
One more thing that I wanted to say.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mark and Rebecca, I know that Jennifer Urquhart,
Yes.
who's a member of PrEP, was also kind of instrumental in getting Jenny in touch with us, and also in assisting with getting some of the first people signed up for the assessments. I think she deserves a little bit of credit for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was actually going to mention that before when we were handing out all the credits and thank yous. It really got started with Jennifer Urquhart out of concern that she had for her property at the time. And it is amazing that we got 50 people signed up. I think it was mostly by her, because there was never, as far as I know, there was never a public announcement soliciting people to sign up. I might be wrong about that, but so yes.
Yeah, shout out to Jennifer.
To Jennifer.
Yeah, she was great to work with. Yeah, she kind of called me out of the blue one day and said, I'd be interested in this for my property. And I have a feeling there'd be a lot of other people that would be interested too. So kind of started making the connections with the chief and got connected to PrEP, and it all sort of like unfolded and turned into this great opportunity. So yeah, really appreciate all those connections.
So I'd like to take the time, thank everybody that was involved, obviously PrEP, Conservation District, DNR, all the volunteers within our community, and obviously Jennifer that was just mentioned for helping get this put together for our community. And again, hopefully we're able to host more of these in the future by working together and improving and expanding our cooperatives within our, not only our community groups, but also the county groups and potentially state as well. So thank you everybody for this evening. If nobody else has any questions to ask, everybody, thank you so much for your time. Does any other questions? I'll give it one more chance here for anybody to come back with anything. So I hope everybody has a great evening and thank you for spending the time. Again, these will be posted on the fire department's websites. It'll also be posted on PREP's website for anybody to review at their convenience and to gain some valuable information. So thank you everybody for participating this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.